My name is Claire Bennett. I am 36 years old. 9 days after my cybersecurity company hit the news with a $940 million value, my phone lit up. A text from my mom. The first one in 10 months. Family dinner. No excuses. No question mark. No congratulations. Just an order like calling back a broken toy. 10 years ago my parents took my first company away from me. They handed all my clients to my sister. Then they let the whole town believe I walked away on my own, that I dumped 40 clients with a cold letter and never looked back. They passed the potatoes and moved on with their lives. So when that text came in I did not feel angry. I felt something colder. Something more useful. I had been getting ready for this dinner since November and none of them knew it. What I carried into my parents' dining room that night, and what I signed at that table in front of my whole family, none of them saw coming. Not my dad. Not my mom. And especially not my sister. This one starts with a loan. It ends with a signature. The morning our valuation hit the news, my Denver office smelled like champagne at 9 in the morning. Someone taped the headline to the glass wall. Falcon Ridge Security, the company I built out of a tiny apartment next to train tracks, was now worth more than every business in my hometown put together. My business partner Ryan Mitchell brought me coffee and a grin. Reporters want the founder story, he said. Scrappy girl from Ohio. 9 days later I was staring at that message from my mother. Here's something you should know. My family never officially threw me away. That would mean admitting something bad had happened. Instead for 10 years my mom sent Christmas cards signed, Love, Mom and Dad. On my birthday she called for one polite chat about the weather, then hung up before anything real could be said. My dad never called at all. They didn't disown me. They just marked me down the way my dad marked down water-damaged boxes at his office supply store. Still on the shelf. No longer worth full price. Now the world had put a new price on me. $940 million. And here came my mother right on time. To explain why I was ready, I have to take you back to 2013 when I was 23 and started Northstar Cyber Security out of a rented garage in Dayton, Ohio. My first client was a law office hit by hackers on a Friday. I worked their case for 30 hours straight and wrote down every step. They cried, they paid, and they told 2 other firms. That was my whole marketing plan. Word of mouth and careful notes. I logged everything back then, a habit that would one day save my life. Our dinner table was never really a dinner table. It was a business meeting with gravy. My dad, Richard Bennett, owned Bennett Office Solutions. My older sister Lauren worked marketing for him and sat at his side. I was the part of the family that hadn't proved its worth yet. When Northstar started growing I needed money to hire and the bank turned me down flat. Then one Sunday my dad offered me $150,000 across the pot roast. I wasn't naive. His lawyer drew up a convertible note, meaning if I couldn't repay it the debt could turn into ownership of my company. I hired my own lawyer too and she warned me that with family, standard terms can turn personal fast. So I negotiated the right to pay it off early and I planned to use that right fast. My dad signed with his favorite pen. Family money stays warm, he said. My mom said how nice it was that the girls were finally back in the family business. I corrected her. Northstar was mine, not the family's. She smiled her church smile. Of course, honey. I wrote that down anyway in a notebook where I tracked loose ends. Over the next 2 years I paid back $90,000 early, receipt by receipt. By spring 2016 I owed $60,000, with a payoff date set for that September. 4 more months. I remember that number clearly because my father remembered it too. By 2015, Northstar had 9 employees and 40 steady clients. My office manager Walter Brooks, a retired Air Force records clerk, alphabetized everything like it was sacred. Lauren started posting photos of my server room on her dad's company page, captioned, Our Family's Tech Arm. I asked her to take it down. He called me dramatic. Late that year my dad caught a new fever. A strip mall project a golf buddy swore was safe as bricks. In my line of work the attack always begins somewhere you're not watching. The strip mall started bleeding money in early 2016. Permits stalled, costs doubled. I learned later from bank filings and my Aunt Linda that the losses crept towards $700,000, and my dad had quietly pledged his own store's cash flow to cover it. Then came the strangest move of all. My dad set Lauren up with a brand new company, Carter Bennett Group Marketing and IT Services, with her husband Ethan Carter's name beside hers. My sister, who couldn't tell a firewall from a space heater, was suddenly in the IT business. I sat with that news for a week and my gut told me something my brain didn't want to hear. I know what it looks like when someone builds their next move before they act. So I called my dad's lawyer and moved my payoff date up. I also signed one routine piece of paperwork that spring, an insurance amendment for the loan. One clean page signed in blue ink mailed back. Remember that page? The letter arrived July 11, 2016, 8 weeks before my scheduled payoff by certified mail. My father's lawyer was calling in the acceleration clause. Full balance $60,000, due in 10 days. If I couldn't pay, the loan would convert into a controlling share of my company. I called my dad. He talked to me like he was reading meeting minutes. Market conditions. Nothing personal, Claire. Paper is paper. Dad, I have the money scheduled for September. We have a date. He said the loan wasn't obligated to wait. And he was right. That's the part nobody warns you about. You can do everything correctly and still lose because the power to call a loan lives entirely on the other side of the table. I fought for 10 days. 3 banks turned me down flat. I offered to pay everything plus penalties. His lawyer's reply was one sentence. The note holder elects conversion. On day 10 I wired what I had as a good faith payment. It was returned the next morning. On Monday my key spun uselessly in my own office lock. They'd changed it over the weekend. The shareholder meeting took 20 minutes, held at the table I'd bought secondhand. My father sat at the head, now holding 60% of my company. His lawyer read the resolutions. Remove Claire Bennett as CEO, appoint Lauren Bennett Carter as president. My sister didn't look at me. She looked down at a legal pad and underlined something, and I understood the whole plan at once. This hadn't been a loan gone bad. This had been a harvest. My father came around the table afterward and put his hand on my shoulder, gentle as a doctor delivering bad news. It was never yours, sweetheart. You just ran it for the family. He meant it kindly. That's the part that still stops me. My mother, at the far end of the table, said nothing at all while stacking the meeting papers into a neat pile. I drove home and sat on the floor between 14 boxes of my office things, cataloging them one by one, because taking inventory is the only prayer I've ever been good at. 2 weeks later, a client emailed me, "You could have at least said goodbye in person instead of a form letter." I had no idea what he meant. I asked him to forward it. What came back turned my stomach worse than the shareholder meeting had. They were client transition letters, printed on Northstar letterhead, announcing that I was voluntarily handing all my clients to Carter Bennett Group. Each one thanked the client for their trust. Each one was signed by me. Except I had never seen them before. I laid my real signature beside the one on the letter and my skin went cold. It was mine exactly, the same crowded C, the same tail on the T. A perfect scan of the signature I'd signed once in blue ink on that one boring insurance page. They had lifted my signature and stamped it onto 40 goodbye letters. Every client in Dayton now believed I had abandoned them personally. And here's the detail that kept me up for years. The handwriting on the envelopes was neat and looping and patient. The kind that addresses 200 Christmas cards every December without smudging one. I knew that handwriting. I wasn't ready to say the name out loud yet, not even alone in my car. But I photographed every letter and saved them in a folder named Northstar, Open Items. Old habit. Open items eventually get closed. I took everything to a lawyer that August. Forgery and fraud are real claims, she told me, but claims need real evidence. Original letters, master files, internal emails. All of that lived on Northstar's own servers, and I no longer had any right to walk through that door. Walter Brooks, who might have known where things were filed, had already moved to Florida. A lawsuit meant 6 figures I didn't have in a county where my father had sponsored the youth baseball league for 20 years. I understood the math. Some doors don't slam. They just click quietly. Around town the story had already hardened. Poor Richard Bennett, bailing out his flighty daughter, who dumped her clients on her sister and skipped town. My mother heard that version every Sunday at church and never once corrected it. "We don't discuss family business," she told my Aunt Linda. My bank account that October held $3,200. I bought a one-way ticket to Denver, packed 2 suitcases and took one thing from the wreckage, the old whiteboard from my garage office, still showing the ghost of my first network drawing. Denver didn't care whose daughter I was, which made it the most honest place I'd ever lived. I rented a studio next to the freight tracks, Close enough that the 2 in the morning train became my alarm for finishing incident reports. For 2 years I worked graveyard shifts nobody else wanted. Clients started asking for me by name. In 2018, with 2 engineers who trusted me, I started Falcon Ridge Security. A falcon hovers dead still in high wind before it strikes. I didn't pick that name by accident. I built that company the way a burn survivor rebuilds a house. Every wire checked twice. When investors pushed for control, I walked away even when my own board thought I was crazy. Every disaster begins the moment somebody hands over trust without checking it. I had made my last careless trust at 23. Behind every careful choice sat one small folder that moved with me from laptop to laptop. Never deleted, barely opened. Northstar. Open items. I wasn't building a lawsuit. My lawyer had cured me of that dream. Falcon Ridge grew the way trust grows, slowly and then all at once. A state contract in 2019, a big funding round in 2020, another in 2024 that put us in the national news. My mother mailed me a local newspaper clipping with a sticky note. "We always knew you had it in you." The same people who had priced me to zero were now claiming credit for my comeback. My dad never called. Not once. Bennett Office Solutions was shrinking as the printer business faded, and Carter Bennett Group, built on my 40 stolen clients, was slowly starving too. By 2025, Lauren had renamed it Carter Group, taken out loans to cover payroll, and the whole thing was leaning like a shed in a windstorm. I felt no joy hearing this. 12 of my old employees were still in that building, people I had hired and trained myself. Then in October 2025, my lawyer Nora Patel called. "Your sister's company just showed up on a distressed asset list." The bank was calling in Carter Group's loans. Liquidation was on the table. She expected me to have feelings about my sister. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "Nora, in a liquidation, what happens to the company's records?" "Kept for the legally required time," she said, "then destroyed. Shredded. Wiped. Gone." I closed my eyes and pictured a file room I'd never visited, holding the only original copies of 40 letters I never signed, along with the old Northstar email server. The proof of what my family did to me was sitting inside my sister's failing company, about to be fed into a shredder. "I want to buy it," I said. "Not the letters. The company." Nora asked one question. "As Falcon Ridge Security?" "No. As Pinecrest Holdings. A private company, funded with my own money, no trace of my name on the surface." By November the deal closed. Pinecrest acquired 70% of Carter Group for $1.6 million, plus a $400,000 loan to keep payroll steady. 34 jobs saved, including 12 people I'd hired myself. Lauren kept her 30% in her title with no idea who owned the rest. The document boxes arrived on a Tuesday. I told my team I'd personally review the legacy files, which raised no eyebrows because I always handle things personally. I found it in the second hour. A gray banker's box labeled Client Transitions 2016. I put on gloves, set up a camera, photographed the box from every angle before opening it, because keeping records is close to a religion for me. Taped inside the lid was a yellow sticky note, 9 years old, still legible. "Use the March signature page. RB. I know my father's handwriting the way you know a voice through a wall." This was the hand that signed my report cards, now instructing someone to grab a page with my name on it and put it to work. Underneath lay all 40 original letters, crisp, never creased, each carrying the same scanned signature, tilted a fraction off true, stamped 40 times. I photographed each one. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Then at the bottom of the box I found something the label hadn't promised. A rubber-banded stack of spare envelopes, pre-addressed, never mailed. The handwriting was not my father's. I had known that handwriting since before I could read. Neat looping patient. The hand that addressed 200 Christmas cards, that wrote "so proud of you" in my graduation card. My mother had addressed those envelopes. You only make spares when you're being careful about a mailing, when you plan for every single one to arrive. For 10 years I had told myself a story I could survive. Dad did this and Mom just failed to stop him. That story died on a Saturday afternoon in an empty office, holding proof that my mother had personally licked the stamps on my own downfall. "It was never yours, sweetheart." His sentence. Her postage. The old email server gave up the rest. A message from my father's account. "Use the March signature page. Claire will understand someday." I called Walter Brooks in Florida. When I told him what I'd found, this Air Force records clerk who never broke alphabetical order started to cry on the phone. He'd forwarded that email to himself the day before they walked him out because it didn't smell right. He sent a sworn notarized statement that week. Now I had everything. Every original, every email, a witness. The only question left was one no evidence could answer. What was it all for? I'll tell you the part I'm not proud of. One night in December, alone with a glass of wine I never touched, I opened a blank document and let the coldest version of myself type. Fire the manager. Call in the loan. Shut the company down. Mail my parents a copy of the forgery file with no note, postmarked Denver. 90 days. Cost to me, nothing. I read it twice. The second time through I heard it, the voice underneath. Nothing personal. Paper is paper. I had just written my father's greatest hits in my own font. That's the trap nobody warns you about when your family runs on a ledger. It doesn't care which side of the table you're standing on. It only wants to keep being the language everyone speaks. Somewhere in me, his arithmetic was already installed and running, and Revenge would just be doing his bookkeeping with better software. I deleted the memo. Felt like pulling a fishhook out of my own hand, slow and backwards and necessary. But deleting a plan is not the same as having one. Nora finally put her finger on the fork in the road. Claire, do you want justice or do you want a verdict? Because the verdict window closed a long time ago. Under Ohio law, a fraud claim generally has to be filed within 4 years, and mine had started running back in 2016. Criminal charges were practically fiction. No prosecutor was reopening a 10-year-old family dispute involving the man who sponsored youth baseball for 20 years. So there it was. I had complete, beautiful proof and no courtroom on earth would ever weigh it. The evidence had one power left. It could make the truth stand up straight in front of the exact people who had spent 10 years believing the lie. Not a jury of strangers. The jury that mattered had always been smaller than that, passing the potatoes. Then what do you actually want? Nora asked. I looked out at the mountains. I don't want it back. I want it true. Then decide what you're willing to pay for true, she said. It's rarely free. That question mattered because the second I imagined the truth landing on that table, I could also see the wreckage it would leave. 34 Carter Group employees had done nothing to me. 12 were my own old people who'd stayed because Dayton was home. If the truth exploded and took the company down with it, they'd lose their paychecks. That math offended me. So I gave Nora a second assignment, one that confused her more than the first. Research employee ownership trusts, the process of turning a private company over so the workers hold the shares. You just bought this company, she said, and now you want to give it away? I told her to draft it anyway and keep it in a drawer. I couldn't fully explain why, not even to myself. 2 weeks later, word leaked that Falcon Ridge was closing its next funding round. That round closed in March 2026. $128 million raised, at a $940 million valuation. My face landed on the business news under the word empire, which made me laugh, since empires are inherited, and mine had been built out of a studio apartment with a freight train for an alarm clock. My phone became a slot machine. Old classmates. The Dayton Chamber of Commerce, warmly inviting me to speak, with no mention of the years its members spent whispering that I'd abandoned my clients. And from the house on Marlowe Street, silence. One day. 3. My father has never once let himself look hungry, and hunger takes time to dress up as an invitation. It took 9 days. Family dinner. No excuses. Which brings us back to where I started. Except now you know what I knew standing in that champagne-scented office, not drinking a drop. The gray box. The sticky note. The envelopes. The affidavit from Florida. The ownership papers sleeping in Nora's drawer. My family was inviting me to dinner because a number with 9 zeros had made me family again. They thought they were setting the table. So was I. Aunt Linda called 2 nights later from her own car, where the honest conversations in my family have always lived. It's not a dinner, she said, skipping hello. It's a board meeting with a ham. Richard's been telling the cousins the family businesses are coming back together. Lauren's been ordered to bring a presentation. I asked what he wanted from me, though I already knew. Money, honey. The bank's been circling Carter Group since fall. He's going to stand up with his glass, talk about family, and ask you to buy your sister's company. Keep the money where it belongs. I almost laughed. My father was about to ask me to buy a company I'd already owned since November. Then Linda's voice went quieter. You know he's not inventing this playbook. Henry Bennett ran this exact dinner on me in 1987, when I wanted to sell my share of the hardware stores and finish my degree. Different table, same menu. Whatever you're planning, and I can hear that you're planning something, don't go into that house alone the way I did. I told her I wouldn't be alone. I'd be bringing 40 witnesses in a gray box. The night before I flew out, I laid 2 cases open on my dining table like surgical trays. Into the first went the evidence. 40 original letters, the sticky note, the certified email, Walter's affidavit, the Pinecrest filings. Everything needed to end Richard Bennett as a respected man inside his own family in under 10 minutes. Into the second went stranger papers. The employee ownership trust Nora had quietly perfected, ready to sign, plus one more document with my niece Sophie Carter's name on top. Standing over those 2 open cases at midnight, I finally asked myself why I was really going. Every milestone of the last 10 years, every funding round, every headline, some part of me had presented to an auditor who was never actually in the room. My father forever reviewing my numbers over a pot roast gone cold 10 years earlier. I had built a $940 million company at least partly as evidence. Exhibit A in a trial that was never going to be held before any real judge because the judge had already ruled in a courtroom that only existed inside me. That's the part nobody tells you about being written out of your family's respect. You can spend your whole life appealing a verdict nobody's ever going to overturn and call it ambition. If that sounds familiar, if you've ever caught yourself succeeding at somebody, waiting for a scoreboard in their face to finally say you were right, tell me in the comments. The auditor in your front row isn't worth the seat. It took me 10 years and 2 open briefcases to see mine clearly. I closed both cases, picked up my phone, opened my mother's text and typed back the only reply it deserved. I'll be there. In the morning I called Nora. Finalize the trust. All of it. Bring me the version I can sign at a dinner table. You're really going to do it in front of them, she said. Not a question. I told her that 10 years ago my company was taken from me at a table in front of my family, in 20 minutes, right past the potatoes. Whatever I did next was going to happen at the same altitude. By Thursday the documents were ready. My 70% of Carter Group, transferring completely into an employee ownership trust for all 34 employees, the $400,000 loan forgiven at signing. And in a plain envelope, a college trust for Sophie funded with $250,000, managed by an independent trustee in Columbus. A woman none of us had ever met, chosen so that no one at that dinner table could ever charm, bully, or borrow their way into it. I booked the flight for Friday, window seat over the wing, the same cheap habit I had when I flew out of Dayton with $3,200 to my name. Somewhere over Kansas I realized I wasn't nervous and the missing feeling was strange, like a missing tooth. I had spent 10 years rehearsing arguments for people who never granted the hearing. Now the hearing was granted and I had stopped needing to argue. The plane landed in Dayton in a light April rain. I checked into a hotel downtown. There was no version of this trip where I slept under a quilt my mother had sewn. Saturday afternoon I drove the rental past my old life. The Northstar office is a dental clinic now. Then without quite deciding to, I drove past the Carter Group building and parked across the street in the rain. Second floor lights on even on a Saturday. Through the windows I could see Lauren, now 40, walking a young employee through something with the flat patience of someone who's explained it many times before. She looked thin, like someone who hadn't slept properly in a long time. 34 paychecks rode on that building, and whatever else my sister was, she'd stayed inside it while it sank instead of jumping. I sat there letting the rain blur the windshield, and I made myself say the complicated thing out loud, alone, so it wouldn't ambush me at the table. She took my clients. She also never forged my name. That sticky note wasn't her hand. She underlined a legal pad while our father cut me out, and she was 30 and terrified of him. None of that is innocence. And all of it is context. Back at the hotel my phone buzzed. My mother again. 6 o'clock tomorrow. Or something nice. Everyone's coming. Everyone. My father had already handpicked the jury for me. I arrived at the house on Marlowe Street 20 minutes early on purpose. I didn't ring the bell right away. Through the front window, past my mother's lace curtains, I saw my father alone, standing at the sideboard where the family photographs live. He had taken down the framed portrait of his own father, Henry Bennett, dead 20 years and still the largest presence in that house. Dad was wiping the glass slowly with his handkerchief, the way you polish something you're afraid of. His mouth was moving. I couldn't hear him, but I've read lips across enough tables in my career to catch the shape of it. I kept it together, Pop. Something, kept it all together. His shoulders weren't the shoulders I remembered. He looked like a man who'd carried a piano upstairs for 50 years, alone, forbidden from admitting it was heavy. I stood in the rain and watched my father rehearse for his own dead father, the exact same way I had rehearsed for mine. The chain went back further than my own grievance. It always does. I want to be careful here because understanding can dissolve things that ought to stay solid. So I'll say it exactly the way I said it to myself on that porch. I see what was done to him. It changes nothing about what he did with it. Then I rang the bell and my mother opened the door with her church smile turned all the way up. There's my girl. Even the welcome came with a bill attached. The dining room was dressed for a state occasion. Wedding china, the tablecloth that only comes out for funerals and Easter. 9 place settings. My father at the head. My mother at his right. Lauren and Ethan Carter with Sophie between them, a library book hidden on her lap. Aunt Linda. Cousins Gary and Beth. An empty chair waiting for me at the foot of the table directly across from my father. And on the good platter, a pot roast, the exact same dish that had been cooling on this table 10 years earlier, while a shareholder meeting across town voted me out of my own life. My mother does not believe in coincidences. She believes in menus. My father, carving, observed that the market's been kind to you. A sentence built to make $940 million sound like whether that simply happened to me. Sophie, 9 years old, the only person at the table with clean hands, asked if I'd ever caught a bad guy. Yes, sweetheart. A few. I felt the envelope with her name on it sitting in my case like a warm coal. Lauren said almost nothing, pushing food around her plate, her wine glass emptying faster than anyone's. She knew what was coming. She'd been ordered to bring a presentation. Then my father set down the carving knife, tapped his glass and stood. While we're all together, I want to talk about family and business. He spoke for 6 minutes and I'll give him this. It was a good speech about hard seasons and loyalty and the Bennett name weathering 3 generations. He said, we 14 different times while clearly meaning me in every one of them. Then he reached the ask. Carter Group was a fine company going through a rough patch and here was Claire, blessed by the market, in a position to do what family does. Fold it in under her umbrella, put real capital behind her sister, keep the money where it belongs. Where it belongs, he repeated, looking at me with the warm, reasonable eyes of a man who has never once questioned himself. My mother touched her necklace. It's what families do. I let the silence sit. What I felt was not rage. It was recognition. This was the same voice that once said, nothing personal, paper is paper. The ledger simply wanted its money moved back home. 10 years and the arithmetic had never blinked. I set down my fork, folded my napkin, and asked the question I'd flown 1,200 miles to ask. Before I answer, Dad, one thing. I turned to my sister. Lauren. Who owns your company right now? The color drained from her face. What? Your company. Who owns it? You kept 30%. Who holds the rest? She looked at Dad and got nothing back. A holding company bought us out during the bank workout in November. Pinecrest. Some investment group out of Colorado. We've never even met them. She stopped. I watched the word Colorado catch up with her. I reached into my first case and laid a thin document on the tablecloth, turned to face her. The Pinecrest Formation Papers. My real wet ink signature above the title sole member. I'm Pinecrest. I bought Carter Group 5 months ago. I own 70% of it. And the $400,000 keeping your payroll alive. That's my bridge loan. The table went so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway thinking it over. Ethan made a small hiccuping sound. Linda set down her fork, claiming a front row seat. My father was stunned for exactly 3 seconds. Then his face bloomed wide open. He laughed, warm and enormous, and spread both arms like a preacher giving a blessing. Well, there it is. It's already back in the family. Claire, honey, you beat me to it. He raised his glass. He genuinely, sincerely thought this was wonderful news. That's when I understood there was no bottom left to reach with talking. So I stopped talking and I lifted the gray box onto the table. There's one more thing that came with the company, Dad. Client Transitions 2016. The room read it together in silence. I opened the lid and laid the contents down the center of the table, one by one. The 40 original letters. Every client I ever had told in writing I was abandoning them, signed by me. Except I never signed one of these in my life. That's a scan of my signature, printed 40 times. The photograph of the sticky note, his handwriting filling the frame. Use the March signature page. RB. Your instructions, Dad. The server email certified. Your exact words. Claire will understand someday. Walter Brooks's notarized statement. Your old office manager. He kept a copy because he thought somebody should. My cousins passed the letters with their mouths open. Linda read the sticky note once and nodded slowly, like a judge who'd waited 39 years for this exact case. Then I lifted out the rubber-banded stack of unmailed envelopes, and this time I said nothing at all. I walked down the table and set them in front of my mother, and let her look at her own handwriting. Her hand flew to her mouth. The room followed her eyes, and one by one they understood. My father's voice cracked in public for the first time in my life. Denial first, that's out of context. Then justification, I was protecting this family. Then both palms flat on the table, the truth in its Sunday clothes. You don't understand what I was carrying. I waited until he finished. I'm not here for the company, Dad, I said, level as a carpenter's tool. I don't want it back. I want it true. Fine, he said, gravel in his voice now, the ledger scrambling for a page that still balanced. Fine. You own it. Congratulations. Take the company. That's what you flew here for, isn't it? Call the loan. Show everyone what you came to do. Every face at the table turned to me, certain they already knew what came next, because they'd all grown up speaking the same arithmetic. Now the strong one squeezes. Instead, I opened the second case. This is what I flew here to do. Nora's documents came out, bound and tabbed. I uncapped my pen and right there on my mother's funeral and Easter tablecloth, signed my 70% of Carter Group into an employee ownership trust. Every share transferred to the 34 people who actually worked there, including the 12 I'd hired myself. I signed away the $400,000 loan, forgiven completely. I slid the packet down to Lauren. The company belongs to your people now. If they keep you, you'll be the first Bennett in 3 generations to hold a job because somebody chose you. She didn't wipe her eyes. She just looked at me the way you look at whether that changed too fast to dress for. I set the last envelope in front of Sophie. For your college, sweetheart. There's a woman in Columbus who guards it, and no adult at this table can ever touch it. Not one. I looked up at my father, hands still flat on the wood, and gave him back his own sentence, the one I'd carried for 10 years like shrapnel too deep to cut out. You were right, Dad. That one was never mine. This one is. I thanked my mother for dinner and stood up. I made it almost to the front door before I heard her chair scrape back. My mother followed me onto the porch into the small April rain, and I turned because some part of me even then was still 8 years old and hoping. She stood under the porch light, arms crossed. Why couldn't you just let us have this? We're your family. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I should have told you. Even with her own handwriting sitting on the tablecloth behind her, the story she reached for was still the one where I had taken something from them. I paid for the truth, Mom, I said. The letters, the company, all of it. I bought it back with my own money. You just watched me carry it twice. She opened her mouth, and I will never know what she was about to say because Lauren appeared behind her, pale, hugging the trust packet like a life vest. My sister's lips moved. The letters. I knew about the. No sound came out. I nodded once so she'd know the sentence reached me anyway. Then I walked down the steps my father had poured the summer I was born, got in the rental car and drove back through wet streets, through a town that used to know me all wrong. I sat by the hotel window a long time that night, waiting for triumph or grief or the urge to call someone. None of it came. What came instead was quiet. An enormous, unfamiliar quiet, like a server room after you finally find the failing fan. Around 11, Linda texted. 1987 finally lost one. Then a minute later, your grandmother would have liked you. The family group chat said nothing at all. No explosion, no defense of Dad, no argument. Just silence, which in my family has never meant peace. It only ever means somebody is taking inventory. I left the group chat. I didn't block anyone. I just stopped holding a seat in a room where my name had always been a line item. Sitting there, I finally audited the last 10 years honestly. I hadn't built Falcon Ridge in spite of that dinner table. I had built a great deal of it for that dinner table. That night I finally walked into the real courtroom, laid out the whole case, won it completely, and discovered in the same breath that I no longer needed the verdict. The auditor's chair in my front row was finally empty. My mother's text had said, "No excuses," and she turned out to be right, though not in the way she meant it. I was done making excuses for them. I flew home the next morning and slept the whole way, which hadn't happened in 10 years. Here's what the aftermath actually looks like 3 months later. The employee trust now runs Carter Group. The workers voted to rename it Right Line Services, and nobody consulted a single Bennett about it, which I consider the healthiest sentence in this whole story. The trust board kept Lauren on as general manager, based on merit, with a 1-year review. My sister, at 40, is the first person in our family to hold a job simply because the people she leads chose to keep her. She sent me a letter in July, handwritten, 1 page. She'd known about the letters since 2016. She told herself it was Dad's call to make. She was sorry, with no softening word attached. I wrote back 1 line, "Run it well." I meant it completely. That's not exactly a reconciliation. It's the beginning of honest accounting. And in my family, honest accounting is about as close to love as we've ever come. My father tells a different version now, out on the golf course. In his telling, he made one hard decision in 2016 that saved everyone's jobs, and I repaid him with a stunt at dinner. He'll tell it that way until he dies, and none of the men he golfs with will ever ask why his own daughter chose to give a company away instead of handing him a check. I've stopped needing them to ask. My mother still sends cards. Same handwriting, same careful postage, as if the envelopes she once addressed for me belonged to some other woman entirely. I haven't opened them yet. I put each one, unread, into a shoebox, because a boundary doesn't always have to look like a bonfire. Sophie's college fund sits quietly in Columbus, watched over by a trustee who has already turned down 1 phone call from my father. Cost her nothing to say no because she owes him nothing. That was always the whole point. And at Falcon Ridge, on the first Thursday of every month, I teach a free evening class for women starting their own companies. Lesson 1 never changes. We read through a convertible note together, line by line, standing beside the old whiteboard from my very first garage office. It hangs in our lobby now, right where love is supposed to sign its name. People sometimes ask me carefully whether I regret any of it. I always tell them the one thing I know for certain, all the way down to my bones. Everything they were ever able to take away from me was never the valuable part. Because the only thing that can never be seized, converted, or signed away in somebody else's handwriting is the proven ability to start again from nothing and build it true. That is my story. 1 yellow sticky note. 40 letters I never signed. And 1 signature I finally chose to give away on my own terms. If this reminded you to read every clause before you take money from someone you love, or to stop auditing your own worth on somebody else's ledger, take it as your sign and do something about it this week. Not someday. Share this with someone who's still carrying a verdict that was never even true. Leave a comment and tell me your own story. I'll see you in the next one. If you want, I can do the next step too. I can make it even cleaner by replacing a few leftover family references for full consistency and polish it into a more natural final narration version for YouTube.